This week we're talking about stage one in our problem management opportunity development model. And as we have talked over the course of the semester, the first stage is to hear the client's story and to hear the real story in the end. And I'm going to share a personal story with you that may help you kind of bring this to life and how this works. A few years ago, I was in a continuing ed training program with one of my buddies, one of my colleagues, and a person who's really become a pretty good friend of mine. And this was an Adlerian conference. And over the course of time, theoretically, I've come to really appreciate Adlerian concepts and for a great reason because I don't know, it seemed like the Adlerian process is really a relational, deep connection kind of process with a person. And so my friend Wes, who was doing this continuing ed, always does something that helps us not only learn about the Adlerian process, but is always experiential and helps us learn about ourselves and the things that we deal with. And so in this continuing ed thing, his assignment was to think of something, and a lot of times he would ask us to draw a picture, and so or think about something in our lives. And one of the things that I always have kind of hung on in my life, I remember when I was growing up, um, I always wanted to have a station wagon. Now, some of you don't know what a station wagon is today. That would probably be the equivalent of a minivan today. For those of you who know what that is, there's still a few vehicles around that are look like what we used to have as station wagons. But anyway, a station wagon, if you're not sure what that um, was one of those cars. A lot of times would have that wood grain siding down the side of it and um, look kind of like a hearse. Um, but anyway, I always wanted a station wagon. I was enamored by the families that I knew around me that had station wagons, and I loved to ride in them with those folks. And some of them were really cool because instead of facing forward when you were in the very back of the station wagon, a lot of times the seat actually faced backward. So if you were riding in the car and you were in the very back part of the seat, instead of looking forward, you were looking backward toward the people that were behind you when you were traveling. Now, one of the reasons we didn't have a station wagon in my family is because I'm an only child. I don't have any brothers and sisters, and so growing up, there was really no need for a station wagon. But anyway, as we were talking, and we were just kind of reminiscing about these things in life and things that we remember about life, and so I shared, and part of my story was, I always wanted to have a station wagon. Well, why did you want to have a station wagon? You think, or what was it about that kind of car that struck you? And I just thought they were cool for some reason. But in the course of talking about it, and as we think about our stage one today, there are three questions that we've talked about: what's going on, what's really going on, and then what should I be working on? And so, as we were kind of processing something very similar to that in terms of really, okay, I hear your story. What was it about the station wagon, and I like that. I always dreamed about having that station wagon. There's more to the story than that. And so, as we were talking, and what I want you to understand is some of these things, as we were talking them out, I never realized until we began to kind of explore what was behind those concepts and those ideas. And so, in this training, we talked about the station wagon. And so we began to talk about, well, what does a station wagon represent? Now, think about this in terms of a person who's growing up as an only child, looking at my family with my mom and dad and I. as an only child, and then looking at other families where a lot of times there were several siblings, and there were these cool station wagons. And so I'm not thinking about necessarily the number of children in the family. I'm just thinking about the station wagons. So as we were talking, began to think about, well, what does a station wagon really say about a family? What is the connection with that family and the station wagon? Well, it's exactly that. Families who have large numbers of children typically would have a station wagon because you needed the room to hold all the kids. Well, that's kind of what a minivan is today. You know, if you have several children, then just a sedan or a regular size car or even a minivan or even, excuse me, an SUV for that matter, doesn't always have the extra room. So now we have minivans. So if I were alive today and this were my dilemma, I'd probably say, well, I really thought minivans were cool. So we began to explore it, and what did that mean? And so it was, well, minivans or station wagons represent families. Well, that's great. Okay, so that's a part of what's really going on. So we're getting a little deeper here and a little more specific about this station wagon. Okay, well, families. Well, what about my family? You know, decent family, and my parents were great. They were loving and caring and nurturing. I couldn't have asked for a better family. I couldn't have asked for God to give me any greater parents than God gave me. But in my mind, I'm thinking about, okay, somehow or another, this station wagon, this car, represents something, and it represents a family. And as we began to explore this and get deeper, then we began to get to the deeper issues represented by the station wagon. So we go from the story, what's going on? Well, when you think about something in your life growing up, what stood out to you, a memory or a thought? Well, I always wanted to have a station wagon. Oh, really? Well, we could have just left it at that. So you always wanted a station wagon. Well, that's great. No, what? Let's go a bit deeper. Let's get to the real story and see what's really going on here. What did that station wagon represent? Well, when I began to look at it, it represented families. Well, what was wrong with my family? Nothing. When I think about it today, but as a child growing up who looked at those station wagons and thought they were just really cool cars, but I began to realize that for me it represented something else. It represented family. Again, nothing wrong with my family, but I wasn't thinking that way. So we begin to see what's really going on here. So a car begins to represent what a family looks like. Well, what's the difference? Most of the families that had station wagons had a lot of children. There was only one child in my family. That was me. We always had nice cars, but we didn't have a station wagon. Only one child. No station wagon. Well, if station wagons represent families and what families are supposed to look like, then what did that mean for me? So we begin to get to the right story. And then if I were in counseling, it would be, well, what do I need to work on? Well, here's the right story. What I began to realize through that process of reflection was I began to think, because we didn't have a station wagon, there must be something wrong with my family. That we must not be the right kind of family. Because for me, having a station wagon meant you were a good family, that there was something right about your family. So if we didn't have a station wagon, then there must be something wrong with me, and there must be something wrong with my family, because we didn't have a station wagon. See, that was emotionally the real story, the right story. Because what that had done for me, even later in life, was keeping that idea going and perpetuated that there must be something wrong with me, that I'm not good enough, somehow I'm a failure. And so that began to be a theme. So when you think about that in a counseling process, then what's the right story? What should I work on? If I were your client and I were talking with you that way, what would you tell me I need to begin to work on? Well, is it just go out and get a station wagon or a minivan? No. It's that underlying that are self doubts and questions about yourself. I've shared with you the things that I've done educationally. And there's a part of the motivation and drive, and this is one of those Adlerian concepts of striving for superiority. And to some extent, the Adlerians even get into what they call compensation or overcompensation for areas where you see yourself lacking or inferior. One of the concepts Alfred Adler talked about was inferiority, and he kind of coined the term inferiority complex. Well, see, that began to be the right story for me, the thing that I needed to work on. And so I realized that through that process of thinking and reflecting, we went from talking about a station wagon to actually realizing that deep down inside, there were things about me that I felt inferior, or I felt like weren't right, or weren't up to par like in everybody else's life. And again, back to the whole school thing. I think one of the things that's fed into me doing a lot of educational things is that's a striving and a push to kind of prove to the world and prove to people that you're smart or you're capable and you can accomplish these things. Um, there's also some other reasons that I think are good reasons, but you can see how you begin to do things in life that are related to those questions. But if you just ask me a reflection in life and I said, hey, it was a station wagon, and you stop there, you would never get to the right story. But by exploring it in that session, we really began to get to the depth of the story. And one of the themes in my life is always feeling like, not maybe always, but a lot of times knowing that there's something behind the scenes that plays into my mind and into my thinking that somewhere or not, I'm not good enough, or that there's something wrong with me, or that I'm inferior in some way or another. Truth is, I'm not. You know that. None of us are in God's sight, but it feeds that. And so, as a client, you would want to work with me on dealing with the right story. What do I need to work on? Well, it would be those questions of inferiority, those self doubts, those questions about my worth. And depending on what process you used or how you wanted to talk to me about spiritual things, even in counseling, it would be to understand who I am in God or who I am in Christ or just who I am as a person that has worth and value. And we would talk about that. But that's a great example and a personal example for me of something that was just really about kind of just an exercise in a continuing education program where we just kind of looked at something on the surface that you could just stay there. But when you really started to explore it and get deeper and really ask, okay, what really is going on here? What's the real story? And when you ultimately dig down to really what do you need to work on, you realize that's where we need to go. And so for me, that was just a personal experience to kind of play out this stage that we're talking about as you really need to explore with clients, not just what's on the surface, but what's the real story. And that takes time and it takes patience. So I hope that will help you this week, just really from my own personal standpoint of self exploration. Bless you this week and have a great week.